Andrew, what is Vision Zero and its main objective in the field of transportation safety?
I'll keep it simple. At its core, Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries in transportation. It also helps promote safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all.
Transportation safety is key in civil engineering. Every year, over 1.35 million people, that's 1.35 million people die on the world's roads, and up to 50 million are seriously injured. These numbers are staggering, and they're a harsh reminder that road safety is a pressing global issue that affects all of us. In today's episode, I'm joined by Andrew Ceifetz, Vice President and National Director for Transportation Safety at WSP USA, to talk about Vision Zero and how it aims to create safer roads for everyone. From reducing speed limits to redesigning road infrastructure, we'll explore the strategies that are making a real impact. Whether you're a driver, cyclist, pedestrian, civil engineer, or simply care about safer streets, this conversation will give you valuable insights into Vision Zero's mission and the benefits it brings to communities around the world. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Andrew Ceifetz is Vice President and National Director for Transportation Safety at WSP USA. Andrew, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So, Andrew, to get us started off, maybe you could share with our audience a little bit about kind of your career path and what led you to becoming the Vice President and National Director for Transportation Safety at WSP USA.
Sure. I've always had an interest in science and technology, and from an early age, I think I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I enrolled in the Civil and Environmental Engineering program at the University of Michigan, started out thinking I wanted to be an environmental engineer, but a tour of a wastewater plant on a really warm spring day kind of made me change my mind. I looked at the civil side of my degree, knowing that I still like to be outside, and thought that transportation engineering would be something related to what I wanted to do. And so I took an opportunity with a small firm that focused on transportation infrastructure. After a bit more than 8 years, I took a job with a different firm in the U.S. that mostly focused on asset management and safety, such as planning, road safety auditing, research, and I loved it. It was a great fit for me. That firm was purchased by WSP about 7 years ago, and many of my new WSP colleagues started reaching out about some of the tools and processes and techniques we used on the safety side. When the US DOT adopted the National Roadway Safety Strategy in 2022, I think WSP started to realize that in order to help best align ourselves with those goals, it made sense to have somebody help coordinate different safety activities at WSP. And so they offered me the opportunity to build up a safety practice. So in that role, I started working across the country, connecting people and practices of best practices, people with certain skill sets, working on research, and really happened to oversee a variety of safety planning and research projects all over the U.S.
That's great. And just to be clear for our listeners, when you say transportation safety, I know it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but it's not like design of the roadway. It's more of like the safety that goes into, is it the construction and then the ultimate use of it? How would you describe it if you were just breaking it down?
I think it's all of that. Part of it is helping better plan and understand the design in opportunities to make things safer, to reduce the likelihood or the severity of a crash before it happens, but also what we can do to better operate our roadways. Are there things we can add to existing roadways? Are there things that can be aligned with other transportation practices like transit, maintenance, ITS, intelligent transportation services, all ways that contribute to how people move, interact, understand, operate, and be safe on the roads.
That's great. So, Andrew, what is Vision Zero and its main objective in the field of transportation safety?
I'll keep it simple. At its core, Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries in transportation. It also helps promote safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all.
Interesting. Obviously, no small endeavor, but it sounds like it would be something that would require collaboration amongst a lot of parties, of course, across the globe. And I'm excited to hear more about it. But let's talk a little bit about your personal and professional experiences that have kind of shaped your involvement with Vision Zero or other road safety initiatives.
Sure. I think I mentioned that, part of it fell into safety in one sense by a career choice in the firm that I started working at. But I think subconsciously I was drawn to it because of a personal connection. I had a grandfather that was killed in a crash after my father graduated from high school.
Hmm.
It occurred years before I was born, so I never got to meet him. But more recently, I found a copy of the obituary and realized that I drive past that exact location on that roadway every time I go to the office. And so I think, like a lot of people, there's a real personal connection to safety and realize how it impacts everybody. That I think everybody knows somebody that's been in a crash or been injured or worse, been killed. And I'd love to hear that people don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that personal connection certainly can give it some more meaning for someone who's maybe working on a project for sure. And like you said, unfortunately, a lot of people know people that have been in accidents, just because of the numbers out there. But I'm happy to hear that the Vision Zero is really focusing on trying to reduce that. So, how does Vision Zero differ from traditional traffic safety approaches in civil engineering? And are there any comparable initiatives that maybe align with the same challenges or goals of Vision Zero?
Yeah. Historically, I think engineers focused on reducing crashes, and there was a sense that if a crash occurred, then the driver must have been doing something wrong. That's why some people will talk about them as accidents. As a safety professional, we talk about crashes because there are events that go into it. There are choices that are made or not made that really speak to it. And so I don't think that when somebody gets injured or killed on the roadway, it's an accident. I think that there was a decision that was made about how to drive, how to operate, how to pay attention if they're speeding or not that really contributes to that. And as an engineer, I think we can help get involved in that conversation by some of the choices we make in communicating to drivers what roadway is supposed to be like. What is a safe operating speed? Do you expect people to be crossing? Where should you be looking for other traffic? So I think Vision Zero really changes that focus because it really aims to reduce fatalities and serious injuries, not all crashes. So it really considers that human focus. So when we start talking about people being injured, then we can really start thinking about those causes of those injuries and look at strengthening all parts of that transportation system, how we design, how we operate the roads, how vehicles can help react and protect the occupants, how we can improve response and care if someone is injured in a crash. And that's really led to, as you said, some of the other programs like the adoption of the safe system approach, which is really a multi-pronged approach that looks at safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, and post-crash care. And it's really a holistic way of looking at our roadway and transportation networks that everybody has a shared responsibility to improve the networks and make it home safely at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like the idea of using the word crash instead of accident. I mean, listen, there are lots of different car crashes that happen for different reasons, but I know sometimes you'll hear, hey, there was an accident, and then you'll hear the details, and it was like someone was going 110 miles an hour at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And so that's not really an accident. That, like you said, that's a bad decision that someone was making. So, and again, that's not everyone, but I'm just saying a lot of times you'll hear that. And so I think that it is important the way that you frame it out and the way you think about it, because I think that also can inform some of the initiatives that we put in place or projects that we put in place to try to reduce some of these crashes. So it's interesting to see how this evolves. So what are some of the challenges that engineers may face when applying these Vision Zero principles to existing infrastructure and road networks?
Yeah. I think there's always going to be competing interests and challenges for that available space. In a lot of places, especially older cities, have seen population shifts. And so maybe in some cases there's less traffic on those existing roads than there was originally designed for. And some of that space could be repurposed for other things like sidewalks or bicycle lanes or buffers or even medians. But in a lot of cases, it's maybe just possible to narrow some of the existing lanes and kind of fit in a couple smaller elements without really reducing the overall roadway. But some of these changes just may not work. And a lot of roadways are at capacity. And so you talked about some of the other competing needs is things like throughput. And so if we take away some of the opportunities to traverse one roadway in one manner, that might just shift traffic to another roadway, which could translate some of the problems over there. So then there would have to be additional studies and potentially additional countermeasures if we start increasing concerns on other roadways. We can't just say, oh, people should just take the bus or just walk if there isn't public transportation available or if neighborhoods or businesses and stores aren't within walking distance of each other. So I think those kind of improvements, they're going to take time and investment before there can be significant shifts.
Yeah, and I think as an analogy, I did a lot of work in stormwater as a civil engineer, and it's kind of like if something's flooding, someone will just say, well, why don't we just dig a basin there and make it better? And you're like, you can't, because then you're going to affect the downstream and the upstream, and you have to consider all that. It's the same thing like you're suggesting with traffic. If you alter one roadway, you have to think about the other roadways that are connected to it and how it's going to affect them. So I think engineers have to realize that it isn't necessarily an isolated situation. It's not in a vacuum or a bubble where, hey, we could just improve this roadway and we're good to go type of thing. You really have to kind of step back and do an analysis of everything else that's involved. And that's where I would imagine safety also really comes into play, because if you're adding more traffic to another roadway, now you could have a big safety concern on another roadway, that happens. So obviously you can see how things are connected here and how you really have to think about everything that goes into it, which is why this becomes somewhat complex. And, another question I'd have for you is, we do a lot of work in project management. We do a lot of project management training, and one of the challenges in project management is that you always have to do good quality control in your projects, but you want to finish your project on time and you want to keep the budget low, right? So what happens a lot of times is people say, hey, we don't have time for quality control. We kind of got to cut it out. And that's a big problem. So I could see something similar to that in transportation, which is this idea of, how can you balance these safety improvements when you have other project goals, right? Like cost efficiency and traffic flow optimization. How do you approach that, trying to balance that?
Yeah, I think, we've come a long way in the last several decades with how we can better analyze and predict some of the effects, some of the safety effects, and operational effects of different design choices. There are tools and there are equations that we can use to understand the capacity of a roadway, or the speed of travel, or the likelihood or prediction of actually potential crashes and the frequency of those crashes and what types of crashes those are. But I think, it gets more at the heart of the issue when it comes to safety. And I'm not always sure if balance is the answer. If there's a history in some locations of people getting injured or killed, then should a project ignore those in the name of saving a few seconds of travel time? I mean, I think ethically, it's imperative to start on the premise that people shouldn't be killed or seriously injured when they use our transportation networks. And there are policies that can be enacted to kind of make that a primary goal. So there are ways of determining those costs of traffic delay, like we can quantify the speed and the emissions and the gasoline costs and environmental factors. Unfortunately, we can also quantify the statistical value of a human life. There are a lot of actuarial tables that'll talk about the cost of somebody being killed, the cost to society, the cost to make them whole, or what their life would have accomplished. And oftentimes those are kind of used in order to balance those trade-offs between different safety objectives and different operational objectives. And so while there are plenty of models that can weigh those costs and benefits, I'd just start with the basic question. Would you put a price on someone being killed? What if they were your parent or your spouse or your child?
Yeah, I mean, when you think of it like that, or when you say it like that, it definitely really kind of hits home and shows you how impactful this work of transportation safety can be. And you're right, it's very much not necessarily picking one thing over the other, but, from an ethical standpoint, especially as a licensed professional engineer, we have to look out for the safety and health of the public first and foremost. So that transportation safety to me fits right in with that. So I could see how that's extremely important. And again, I used the analogy before. It's like in project management, we don't have time to quality control the plans. Again, that goes right to safety as well, because if you miss something from a quality standpoint, you compromise your project, and God forbid something happens to someone. It's the same idea here. We can't, as engineers, we can't, kind of skimp out on things like that when there are lives at stake here. So it's a very interesting topic, and I'm happy to hear that there does seem to be multiple initiatives focusing on improvement from a holistic standpoint, as you said, which is great. So one other thing I want to ask you about here is, let's talk a little bit about collaboration in transportation safety. We obviously were dealing with engineers, policymakers, communities, all of these different stakeholders, if you will, are going to impact the success of these projects. So can you talk a little bit about how important collaboration is in transportation safety and how you approach it?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It helps really to start by identifying that common ground and those common goals, because I think each group, like you said, engineers and lawmakers and the public, they have different metrics of what they consider to be successful, or based on how they quantify things or what they perceive. So by working together and really understanding each group's needs and vision, then we can start to identify where there's already an alignment and focus on kind of those other things where maybe there's a bit of a disagreement. So from a Vision Zero standpoint, an example could be how communities want to be able to live or work and recreate in areas they feel safe. I think people would generally agree with that statement that those are the kinds of areas and roadways that they want to walk on or bike on and live on. And so when we can do that, we're able to people from an environmental or from an economic development standpoint. A safe road could lead towards areas that people are want to take a leisurely walk through a downtown or have a meal at a restaurant and a sidewalk cafe. People might be more inclined to walk or bike if they have the facilities to do it. And rather than kind of maybe driving out to a mall or a shopping center on the outskirts of town because they don't feel comfortable walking. So I think we can identify projects that speak to everybody's needs and wants. Engineers want to design safe and viable projects. Government officials, local officials want communities that they can promote that are vibrant and thriving for residents and businesses. People want to go to those communities where they feel safe. And so by creating those safer communities, slowing traffic, separating people and vehicles, then policymakers can help encourage those goals by endorsing those projects that contribute to safer roadways, because they can also note how those help the businesses and draw people into the community as well. I mean, we could go even beyond that. Safer communities could encourage additional development as people are drawn to those communities, helping build up the funding opportunities and tax bases of the community. And if we really want to go crazy, then we can talk about highlighting how safer roadways might actually encourage insurance companies to lower rates and policies when living and working in there. So I think there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of benefits in the public sector, the private sector, the governmental sector about why safety is beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, and I think, again, I like to use project management a lot as an analogy, but in project management too, like when you have stakeholders on a project, you really have to understand like kind of their interest, each of their different interest levels in the project and what their perspective is. And I think the same goes here. Like you mentioned, you've got citizens, you've got policy makers, you've got engineers. They're all kind of looking at this project with a little bit of a different lens on it, but probably really want a similar goal. And so it's really digging into that to make sure we get everybody on the same page, especially when you're dealing with the public and roadways and things that have a real impact on people's lives. So one other question about Vision Zero that I wanted to ask you, I know it's a global initiative, but in terms of like locally, for example, like let's say at a state level, is it something that it's like Vision Zero is a project where you're like these DOTs or whoever's involved with it are constantly like investigating the safety of roadways and they're eliciting help from companies like WSP USA, for example? Is that what it is? Is it kind of like a running project where they're kind of going through different roadways and looking for help from experts to just kind of analyze their safety? How does it get, I guess what I'm going to say is it sounds like a very high, like, okay, Vision Zero sounds awesome, but how is it getting down to the ground?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways. Every state has a strategic highway safety plan or an equivalent, which is kind of an understanding of their needs, their goals, their visions, their targets and metrics with a focus on safety. It can be called different things. Some will have adopt to towards zero deaths or road to zero or Vision Zero, but they're all largely analogous that they have goals of reducing fatalities and serious injuries. A lot of smaller communities have taken pledges, join the Vision Zero movement, or cities have become a Vision Zero city where they adopt a policy of Vision Zero. They develop a specific plan in order to help align their goals and projects towards that. There's more recently, I talked about the National Roadway Safety Strategy and the Safe System approach, and that's adopted by US DOT as kind of an overarching focus on reducing fatalities and serious injuries and making transportation in the US safer. And local communities are doing the same thing. There's been a lot of great success stories around the country, as you said, around the world, of communities that are making strides and looking at things differently and doing things differently to really reach Vision Zero. New York City has adopted speed management techniques where they've done things in order to help slow people down moving through intersections. In Seattle, they've adopted by default a lower neighborhood speed limit of 20 miles per hour rather than 25 or 30 that we see in other communities. Some agencies are implementing what we call intersection control evaluation policies, where they look at different intersection control types instead of just defaulting, say, a traffic signal or something. And there are different things that can be done. And so by focusing on setting different defaults, say maybe making a roundabout as your default option for an intersection and having to explain why that isn't the best solution for a particular case, rather than trying to justify why you need to build one in the first place. So there are lots of things that can be done. And I think the proof's in the pudding. Hoboken, New Jersey is a great example. They did it. They've had, several years now where they haven't had traffic fatalities on their roadway networks. And so there are demonstrable examples around the country of people putting this into practice and seeing the results.
No, I'm happy to hear you say that. And the reason I ask is because, I don't know much about Vision Zero. Obviously, that's why we have you here. But I do know we hear about these kind of grandiose initiatives. And sometimes you're like, it sounds great, but what's going to happen on the road that I take to work every day, right? What's going to happen on the road outside my house or my office? So it's good to hear you give some examples of specific locations, not only implementing initiatives, but Hoboken, for example, getting results, which is ultimately what we're going for here. Vision Zero means zero fatalities, which is what you just cited as an example. So that's great. So, Andrew, any last pieces of advice that you could give for civil engineers that are getting into transportation safety, just from your experience in the field that you can kind of wrap up this segment with?
Yeah. I think a lot of road design has traditionally been more of the look at the row in the column of the table and there's your answer, because it's based on traffic volumes or a roadway type or something like that. But I think safety in particular is an opportunity to be a bit more creative and think outside the box. And so I think the best advice would be don't settle for something just because that's the way it's always been done. Now, every day there are new ideas about ways to analyze data or new technology for roadways or for in a vehicle, new medical techniques that can save lives. We got to remember that there was a time when cars had no seatbelts or mirrors, let alone things like crumple zones or backup cameras or automatic braking. And traffic signals and center lines came after paved roads. They haven't always been there since the horse and buggies. And paved roads were devised to make it easier to travel in cars. So people are always innovating. And maybe that next innovation will be from that bright-eyed young engineer who proposed trying just something a little bit different. Transportation safety, I think I said it's rewarding. Ultimately, I like to sometimes say that I might not be a doctor, but I do think I get to save lives every day.
That's great. No, I really like that. And I think you're right, because for me, I know I didn't do transportation engineering, but to me, it was more or less a bunch of tables from the PE exam where I had to figure out some traffic counts and put some numbers together. So I'm glad to hear you give that side of it. I think it's really interesting for people that you can get really creative when it comes to transportation safety. And it sounds like there's a lot of good work to be done. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back with Andrew and we're going to wrap up on our civil engineering career hot seat. We'll be right back. All right, I'm back with my guest, Andrew Ceifetz. Andrew is the Vice President and National Director for Transportation Safety at WSP USA. We've had some good conversations around Vision Zero and other transportation safety initiatives. But now, Andrew, it's time for the civil engineering career hot seat. You ready?
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so first question, do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, maybe it's a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, just something that you do consistently on a daily basis that's contributed to your success?
Yeah, especially on days I go into the office, I get up early. Not only do I beat the traffic on the roadways, but I'm almost always the first person in to get some time to adjust. I can get some coffee, I can clear out some old emails, I can get prepared for the meetings and tasks I need to accomplish that day. And I really just feel that much more efficient rather than just rushing right to my office, rushing to my desk and trying to get into things.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. So over the course of your career, has there been, whether it's been a book or a philosophy or an author or a training or something that you've experienced that's kind of stuck with you in terms of your personal and professional development?
Yeah, several years ago, actually, another engineer recommended a book to me. It was called Give Your Speech, Change the World. How to Move Your Audience to Action was by Nick Morgan. And this was an engineer from Federal Highway Administration. So when you think about technical organizations, you're thinking about the feds that are working on the standards and developing the roadways. And so I think it was really refreshing for him to suggest it because it's older, it might be out of print, but it really highlighted the need for effective communication, how to deliver a message to an audience. And I know a lot of engineers are not particularly excited about public speaking. So I think it's a really important skill. I think it's important for technical development. It's important for career development to be able to explain succinctly an idea in a meeting to an audience at a conference on a podcast. This taught me, I think, a lot about body language as well as content delivery.
Yeah, and I think you're a good example of this because the transportation safety industry, I would imagine you have to get up in front of the public, you have to get in front of a community and maybe present something. So I think sometimes as civil engineers, we don't realize that we have to present stuff to people. We don't just do calculations. If we want to move our projects along, it's really actually critical to be able to present ideas effectively, whether it's to 200 people or to 2 people. So I think that, getting good at speaking, not mastering it, but getting good at it can be very beneficial. And it sounds like that book could be certainly a help. All right. So, Andrew, thinking back on your managers of the past, right? And again, we're not asking you to name specific names, but if you think of your favorite or some of your favorite managers, what was it that made them your favorite? We're trying to understand like what makes for really good managers and leaders in civil engineering.
I think it's an understanding they really lead a team. They're not just in charge of people. So like really good managers, they share their knowledge, but they're still willing to continue to learn alongside the staff. I'm not suggesting that they need to go out every week with their directs and have a beer, but because they are in a supervisory role and there are still boundaries, but being able to share a common experience really helps build that rapport and build that team. I think it's cliche, but maybe not wrong that people don't leave companies, they leave bad bosses. And there's really some truth to that. Companies that support their managers, that give them the tools to train and build themselves up as well as build their teams, they really probably create a better and more truly desirable work environment.
Yeah, that's great. And I think a lot of times what happens is as civil engineers, we kind of are under this idea that we either design or manage projects, but you also interact and lead people. And we have to remember that component of it because you're not going to manage any project well if you're not able to interact with people and lead people effectively. So I think having the ability to interact, engage with people, and lead them is such a critical role for civil engineers going forward. So that's great. All right, I've got one final question for you, Andrew. We call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you were to get into an elevator with a civil engineering, let's say they're an up and coming civil engineer, not that experienced, and you had about 30 to 40 seconds with him or her, what career advice would you share in that short period of time?
Get away from your desk, get out into the world. Before I focused on transportation safety, I started doing that typical engineering stuff related to roadway design, but I also ran a survey crew. I did construction inspection or oversight for a variety of locations and projects. I did night inspection at an airport. Not only did this help me better understand the whole civil engineering process from survey through design through construction, but also helped me better visualize how a project can be transformed from lines on paper screen, but also give me personal insights into what parts of the job I really liked, which I didn't want to pursue further.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with Andrew more. When I started out, I started doing surveying as well, actually in high school and in college and over the summers. And when I got into the office to do design work, it was like I could see everything in 3D because I knew how stuff was built. And it was just made my life so much, I think, easier. And I probably had more practical designs. It's kind of to Andrew's point, really understanding that whole process is so valuable. So if you are a younger engineer, get out in the field. If you're a leader in a firm, figure out a way to get your people into the field at a young age because it's really invaluable in the world of civil engineering. You know, just doing the design work and seeing things on paper is only one dimension. You really kind of need to understand how things go together, if you will, to kind of be able to make it all work. So, Andrew, I want to thank you for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast. The whole world of transportation safety sounds really interesting, and I'm glad that you were able to kind of stop by and share some of the things that you're working on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Andrew. He's doing great work and important work, and Vision Zero sounds like it's really having some positive impacts. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.